Too many high school athletes are running on empty. They practice hard, they train hard, but their nutrition is holding them back. Today's guest, Stephanie Militano, is a fellow sports dietitian, and she is a Red S expert who's trying to end the cycle of underfueling in sports. We're going to cover why underfueling is such a problem in youth sports and how fueling the right way can give you more energy, faster recovery, and a real edge on the field or the court. So, Stephanie, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. I'm really excited. When you reached out to talk about the topic, I was like, yes, I think every athlete needs to learn more. So I was really excited to hop on and chat.
Yeah, well, and I know a lot of my audience, it's a bit mixed because I speak at a lot of high schools, and so I predominantly have male athletes, but I also have some female athletes. But I know that this topic is not exclusive to female athletes because I've seen the food logs of my athletes, and I know that a lot of them might fall under this. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely not, I would say across the board, any athlete, coach, parent, trainer, recognizing the signs of underfueling is so important because you can correct it sooner. And that's the whole thing is like keeping you in the game.
Yeah, yeah. So what I want to start off with though is like I said, when I speak to high schools, I've asked about like, oh, anybody ever heard of Reds, or has anybody ever heard of female athlete triad? Not even that one. Like a lot of people have never even heard of it. So like, can you just talk about, what Red S is and why it's such a big problem in high school?
Yeah, and I love that you asked the question about what is REDS and what is the female athlete triad because so many athletes really they don't know, especially if you think about like the high school and middle school level, like the triad was kind of replaced by REDS 15, 20 years ago. So they weren't even really around when the female triad was something. And then REDS, when you say like relative energy deficiency in sport, it's such a long thing to say. They just kind of look at you like blank slate. That's probably what you get. Like that face of just like, I don't know. But it's definitely important to know. And REDS is essentially chronic or long term low energy availability, or put simply, under fueling. You're not eating enough to keep your human self and your athlete self going and energized. And some really negative things can happen if you don't correct it soon enough.
And what would you say? You mentioned the red flags. What would you say are some of those red flags that an athlete or parents and coaches might see?
Yeah, some of the initial ones would be hunger. I think this is a really big one. And me myself as a high school athlete, and it's why I support high school and college athletes now because I wish I had this information as a teenager. And it's just something where if you're hungry all the time, like personally me and I work with plenty of clients who are either waking up in the morning starving or are really hungry throughout the day at certain points, or me, I woke up at like 2 a.m. and would grab like graham crackers and pieces of bread and make myself a peanut butter jelly sandwich and then go back to bed. And so that, looking in hindsight, was really terrible. I was underfueled, just not eating enough during the day. And so I think the number one thing is if you have hunger and you're ignoring it, that's a big, big red flag you want to check into. But then more and more chronically, like as you start to underfuel, and it could be intentionally, right? Maybe you're trying to change your body composition, but that can impact your performance and your health negatively. But I see a lot of unintentional or accidental underfueling too. Busy schedules. With school starting back up like a month or so ago, you're now in school, especially high school students, you're in school all the way through and they have really strict rules about eating in class. So you might just be skipping a snack on unintentionally, you just can't get it in. And so if you're skipping a snack and then not eating a complete breakfast, well, now we're short a couple hundred calories here, a couple hundred calories there. That can lead to underfueling, and so there's a lot of different ways that it can happen, but the big red flags are hunger, skipping meals and snacks, and then once you have that chronic low energy availability or underfueling, which equals REDS, that's where you might see changes in hormones. So changes in menstrual cycle for female athletes, changes in testosterone for male athletes. You might have mental changes, so you're more stressed, anxiety increases, more depression. You're not able to focus in class, or performance wise, you can't focus and concentrate on the field or in the pool or in the court. And for team sports, being able to communicate with your other players can be a big difference between a win and a loss, right? And so those are some big things to look for. You're sick often, you're injured more often. So the longer we're in this REDS zone, right, we're underfueling more longer and more chronically, that's where you have bigger impacts on your immune system, your mental health, your sleep. your GI tract and constipation. So the International Olympic Committee did a wonderful job revamping the REDS research and diagrams and information for us dietitians and providers, but also to help educate, athletes and teams and coaches. And they created these beautiful diagrams that really outlined the performance impacts of REDS. And so how athletes are impacted on the field, the court, or the pool, but also the health impacts. And so those two diagrams I refer to often when I'm working with athletes and teams and coaches. And I say, if you're relating to any of these, whether it's the sleep changes or the anxiety or the GI issues, these are your red flags. Use these as your red flags. If you can say, oh, yeah, I'm having changes in my bowel movements and now I'm constipated or I have more anxiety or I can't focus or I'm hungry or you name it, time to talk to your sports dietitian, time to connect with a sports dietitian to really start correcting that so that you're not injured and you're able to stay in your sport.
Yeah. One, I like that you hit on both the female and the male athlete there too, and also the fact that the Olympic Committee, like that's something I hadn't heard of yet, and so that's something I'll definitely dig into because I know, like I said, I think a lot of my male athletes are in this zone of underfueling of this of reds, and I don't explicitly talk about it as reds. I'm like, you're flat out not eating enough, and you think you want to build muscle, and you're not. Like it's not.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's a lot of bigger issues at hand too with that. What are some ways you mentioned like the testosterone in males? Like how would a male athlete know that they're not like they're kind of in that zone of and how that's impacting their hormones?
Yeah, so just not being able to build muscle is a great example. So they're not hitting PRs in the weight room. And this is across the board for athletes, but not as fast or as explosive as they were, not hitting PRs in the weight room, whether it's reps or max weights. Blood work is a great one. So I was actually talking to a male athlete yesterday, and really all athletes, I recommend getting blood work done regularly and asking your doctor to test your hormones and looking for testosterone or estrogen and luteinizing hormone, and just having them look at not only hormones, your general panels, but also adding iron, an iron panel, adding a B12, a vitamin D panel, making sure that at least once, hopefully twice a year, you're getting just an overall check on your hormone levels to make sure. Because for male athletes, it is harder to tell where testosterone is, but we can look at different growth markers in terms of muscle and in terms of height and that sort of stuff, and see if they could be behind just developmentally.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I just think about like even when you mention like some of those times where it might happen is those athletes who are trying to lean out, who are trying to lose some weight. Like I had a baseball player who started trying to do things his own way, like he wasn't following my direction so well. And
Mhm.
it was in a group program that I was doing, and he's like, "Oh, I'm losing like 2-3 pounds a week." I'm like, "Well, how's your energy?" "Not great." "How's your strength?" "Well, I can't lift as much as I used to." Not as fat. Like all the boxes were checked, and I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, like that's not good weight loss right there.
Yeah, and that's such a great example of how leaner isn't better for athletes, and I see this across the board, like, "Oh, if I lose 5 pounds, I'll be faster, or I'll be stronger, I'll this." No, no, most of the time, no, because 'cause you're not just losing body fat, you're losing muscle, and that's not good as an athlete, is you don't wanna lose that muscle.
Yeah, yeah. So, you mentioned some of the biggest reasons why they're underfueling, like one of them is, as we mentioned, the leaning out. Number two being the time and the schedule. The other thing I want to touch on too, though, is your thoughts on like I know a lot of athletes who talk about not being hungry. So that being kind of the
Mm.
reverse thing of like, they're not hungry for breakfast, they're not, really hungry at school or whatever, and they end up going like 6+ hours without eating at times, like, especially in season, I feel like too, when there's a lot more chaos. What's your kind of like take or what have you kind of seen in that?
Yeah, it's so hard to be an intuitive eater as an athlete because if you intuitive eat and you're listening to those hunger and fullness cues, well, now you're not going to eat breakfast because you're not hungry in the morning, and you're not going to have snacks because you're not hungry, and now you're under fueling. And so I always say I use the term athletic intuitive eating with my clients and teams. So I'm like, okay, you can't honor your hunger cues. Like if you aren't hungry, but you have practice an hour, like you're an athlete. You have to feel like an athlete. You're eating, but we can be a bit more intuitive where you have to have a snack. But is that snack something where it's like a one component, two component, three component? Meaning like, is it just a cheese stick? Is it a cheese stick and crackers? Is it a cheese stick, crackers, fruit, pepperoni? Like how many components you can decide, but you're having a snack, right? And so it's giving them kind of guidelines, and as an athlete, you hit on a big one. Like, I'm just not hungry for breakfast, especially if they're up early for school, or like a lot of my swimmers and rowers are up at 5 a.m., 4 a.m. for practice. And so you're thinking about, okay, gosh, how do they eat at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. before they're heading out the door? And it's just about getting them used. I call it training your gut. You're getting your body used to eating in the morning. And so you're working up to a full breakfast, but we're going to start with just a granola bar or just a banana or just an applesauce. We're starting small. We're just getting in the habit of eating in the morning. And then we can build on where it was just an applesauce. Now it's applesauce and a yogurt drink. And we're just building up to getting used to eating before school at 6 a.m. And then once you're comfortable, eventually it could be a bagel with peanut butter and banana and the yogurt drink, right? But we're just getting used to eating in the morning, because as an athlete, not eating or living on air is not an option. You have to fuel your body. You have to. Otherwise, you won't perform. You won't be able to focus in class. You're a student athlete, right? And so I think the big thing is you don't have the option. If you want to be a strong athlete, you have to fuel.
Yeah, yeah. I liked what you mentioned with to the training the gut. The way that I talk about it too with a lot of the athletes, especially when it's like in high school, is a lot of them train themselves out of eating breakfast because they don't have that's the reason they don't have the appetite in the morning. At one point they did. Like a lot of them, not everyone, but most of them, I would say like 90% or more had hunger in the morning at some point, and then that was taken away from them, even either from the change of schedule or from them ignoring it basically.
Yeah.
I describe it as like somebody knocking at your door and you just continue to not answer, and they finally like they leave, they give up, and that's like your hunger. They're just like, okay, fine, we're done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like your body's like you're always talking to you, and if you ignore them, eventually that friend's like, "We're not friends anymore. See you later."
Yeah,
So it totally makes sense. It does. And like on top of that, like they're stressed, like especially I call it like life change moments, like school starting, new season starting, new team, that sort of stuff. Like you have a little bit more anxiety, which is going to blunt your hunger cues. And then intense training naturally blunts your hunger. Like after a big long practice or a run or an endurance, whatever you're doing, sometimes athletes aren't hungry for an hour or two after, but you have to eat, right? So how do we bridge that gap? And that's where we come in as sports dietitians to help them figure out this unique strategy of how can we get fuel in ASAP, but not have you feel terrible because you ate food ASAP.
yeah,
So it's that balance as a sports RD to help them fuel their bodies and be more intuitive and listening and tapping into that hunger cue, but also knowing that there are times they have to eat despite not being hungry because they're great athletes and they want to continue to be great.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So it's funny because some of the questions I had were like we already kind of naturally hit on like the eating heavy for breakfast, like those kind of adjustments. But what about those athletes just in general though, who they don't want to feel heavy? Like a lot of like I've had basketball players and soccer players and stuff who are like, well, I don't want it to feel heavy when I go into a game. Like how would you guide that athlete in terms of their fueling for the day?
Oh, that's a great question. It's looking at the way I coach athletes, I have four key pillars. I have fuel, which is what you eat, finesse, when you eat it, fluids, which is hydration, and then fun, which is enjoying the foods and having just some flair and some good stuff. But when it comes to the fuel and finesse, those are the two I look at. So it's your fuel choices and when you're choosing them. So what I recommend is the closer to practice you are, the more carbohydrate based you want because it digests really quickly and that energy goes straight to your muscles and your brain. Where if you have something that has more protein, more fat, or more complex carbs with more fiber, they digest more slowly. So, yeah, by the time you hit practice, you're going to feel heavier. You're still just going to have not necessarily heavier, but you have more fuel still in your stomach, and that feels terrible. We want to get it through your stomach. And so, within that 1 to 2 hours of practice, mostly carbs. So I don't want you to have a big turkey sandwich right before practice. However, some athletes can. Some athletes have really strong stomachs and rock on. If you can get protein and fat in closer to practice, like that's incredible. I have some who can have a big bowl of oatmeal with peanut butter and all the good stuff and jump in the court. I'm like, that's like enjoy volleyball practice. That's awesome. But some most can't. And so we look at the closer you are to practice, the more carbohydrates, simple carbs that you want. So like a plain bagel, white bread, sourdough bread versus whole wheat bread, that sort of stuff is a great option to just get the fuel, the essential fuel that you need, but not feel nauseous or you still feel the food sloshing around in your stomach when you start practice.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. That's very similar to what I talk about. I also talk about like this more small frequent meals because a lot of them think they need like three big meals, and that was like
Yeah.
a yeah, that was like an eye opener for what my I had a female basketball player that she was like, "Oh, I can eat like small things throughout the." I'm like, "Yes, like you can space them out a little bit more."
Yeah, there's no rules. You don't have to you can have, like you can break breakfast into 3 mini snacks and then have lunch and then snack and then multiple snacks and then dinner, like, there's no rules as long as you're consistent, you're spreading fuel throughout the day. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. I wanna ask this because I know a lot of the athletes, they're thinking about performance wise. Like we talked about it a little bit, but do you have any athlete examples of they were under fueling and then you got them to the right, like to the point where they're actually fueling properly and like how that translated performance wise?
Yeah, well, most of the athletes I work with come to
Yeah.
me because they're I mean, you too probably, they come to you with a challenge, they're struggling, they're under fueling, some with just RED-S and under fueling, some with disordered eating and eating disorders, it's just gotten more serious, and it's about creating that strategy that's unique for them, and I think that's what's most important as dietitians, we don't just shove out one size fits all fueling plans because 'cause we've already talked about how complex athletes are, and so I think that's number 1 is helping an athlete develop a fueling plan, but then educating them and building their toolbox. And I always say, like, if I'm working with you in high school or when you're in college, like, I want you to be able to think of me and reach in your nutrition toolbox and pull out all these tools that we've worked on. And so teaching them just to kind of slowly integrate more fuel. If we take them from under fueling to eating at 100% what they should be in a week, you're going to hate me. Like, you're just going to be so uncomfortable. And so, it's these slow, gradual steps of getting them comfortable and building their confidence. Every step of the way is really my goal, and then I love when I hear them say, like, within a month or so, they're like, "Oh my gosh, like, I'm noticing changes in practice, and I'm feeling better," and then next thing you know, they'll be like, "Wow, coach put me in longer because he noticed, like, my energy's better during my game." I'm like, "That's fantastic," and then, a few months down the line, whether it's 6 months to a year, if this female athlete was missing her cycle, she might say, like, I might get a text that's like, "My period's back," and we're literally screaming, celebrating because that's the awesome is your body can repair itself, but it can't repair and it can't build muscle and it can't strengthen your immune system and your bones if it doesn't have the building blocks to do that. And that starts with nutrition.
Yeah, yeah. Any of your athletes that you get to like for example with that female basketball player I'm referencing, she one of her things, it wasn't even why she started working with me, but she actually got leaner, stronger, etc., like just naturally, like it was like a healthier leaner and it wasn't even what she was trying to do, but it was actually by eating more. do
Yeah.
you do you see that type of thing too?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm like, you have to build, like, you could change your body composition by eating more because your muscles want to build. They want to grow. You're doing this intense workout. So definitely, definitely we see changes. And even then, like, she might have gotten leaner, but her weight might have gone up. And I think that's a big fear, particularly with athletes is, oh my gosh, if my weight goes up, it's bad. No, like, it could be an awesome thing sometimes, or most of the time, you're building muscle, you're putting all this work in if you're lifting and going to practice, like, seeing the benefit of your nutrition and your training and your sleep all come together. I mean, come on, that's what it's about as an athlete.
Yeah, yeah. So with the athletes that you work with, what would be one of the most common first steps that you take them through? Because like I know I have some consistent ones of like these, there's usually three top areas that we address. Like what would be
Yeah.
your top?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I always say, like, walk me through a day. Like, what's a typical day? And then the response I get is, well, every day is different. I'm like, I know, but just walk me through a flow of your day. And I'm looking for two things. One, are there certain points when they're really hungry? Because that's a gap I want to fill immediately. Like, if they're hungry because, especially high school athletes, they either have like a 10 a.m. lunch or a 1 p.m. lunch. So there's nothing, if I have an athlete who has a 12 or an 11:30 lunch, I'm like, you just won. You won the lottery this year. But anyway, so you want to see like, okay, if they're starving in the morning because lunch is so far, like, can we fill a gap with a morning snack or a stronger breakfast? Or so I'm looking to see like where are those hunger gaps? And then I look around training. Like, are there opportunities before and after training where we can add more fuel? And then I look at the end of the day. Is there an opportunity to add some extra fuel at the end of the day? I think that's a missing place that a lot of athletes forget about. It can be challenging if you have late practices. Many of my athletes, and practice between 9 and I have a couple who end at 11 p.m. and they have to get home, shower, and get up for 6 for school. It's just kind of the nature of the level they're playing at. Like, whether it's high school, middle school, elite, semi-pro, whatever it is, you deal with the hand that you're dealt. And so if you can get after, like, you have dinner even at 9 o'clock, but then have that snack at 10 right before you go to bed, like any extra fuel is awesome. So I would say my three things I look at, like filling the hunger gap, looking before and after training, and then the evening if we can get some extra fuel in before bed, because we haven't really talked a lot about sleep yet, but that's when your body does all the repair. And so if you can give your body that little boost of building block that it needs so you can have stronger muscles, stronger bones, a better immune system, I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, yeah. The other one, I mean, you mentioned too, like the challenge of school, and you mentioned earlier the strict rules with that is, like I've had some athletes who they're not allowed, like the kids are not allowed to eat outside of lunch period, outside of the lunch room because of like bugs, because of legitimate reasons. How do you handle that with your athletes?
I always ask, like, what are the rules and how can we rebel against them in a very polite way?
Yeah,
Because I'm like, okay, I'm your nutrition rebel. Like, we're gonna figure this out. And so, one thing I always ask, I'm like, are you allowed liquids in class? And depending on the class, like chemistry, bio, we typically know if there's a lab, and safety reasons, we totally understand. But if it's like a history or a language class, I'm like, okay, you can have a beverage in class. And they're like, yes. I'm like, is there a limit to the beverage? And they're like, well, it might be just water, or the teachers don't really check. I'm like, excellent. Okay, can we take like a Yeti or something and put a smoothie in there earlier in the day, and so you have a smoothie for a snack and you can just drink that, right? Because it really, you can put your Yeti in the freezer overnight, wake up in the morning, it's ice cold, put your smoothie in there, it'll stay cold all the way till the afternoon when you need it. And so there's lots of things like that, like how can we not break the rules, but align with them, like liquids only, no problem. I could do liquids only, right? And we can find things like that. Or sometimes it's, can we make a PB&J and cut it in quarters and then between class put a quarter in your mouth and go, or a sunflower and butter if you're a nut-free school. But really just finding sneaky ways to sneak in fuel, because as an athlete, it's hard to go from breakfast to lunch. And if you have that 10 o'clock lunch and practice is at 2, like that's too long to go without fueling. So we've got to get really creative, like really creative with
yeah.
plan.
I know. I'm usually like, okay, Cliff Bar, just shove it in real
Yeah,
quick, like quick bites or whatever, like whatever you can, just those quick little things. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you get it. You get it.
yeah. Yeah, we'll go straight to trickier topics. Is number one, we talked about like with your focus, it's under fueling. It's trying to get them enough fuel. How do you balance calories and quality of food?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so in my practice, because I work with so many athletes who have disordered eating or eating disorders or just really challenging relationships with foods, I typically don't talk about calories. And some parents will say like, "Well, how will we know they're eating enough?" And I use the plate method and we talk about that, and honestly that works because counting calories and macros for athletes, like we've touched on a million times already, but they're so busy. They're so busy. Like they don't have time to measure and type in an app and then, oh yeah, this app is now screaming at them because they're over on sodium, but they have to be over on sodium because they're athletes and all this stuff. And so I typically don't do that, and we'll just focus on like, okay, let's build out your plate and let's make sure you're eating enough. And we talk about the balance of macronutrients. So the purpose of protein, carbs, fat, color. But then that goes to my final pillar, which is fun. So I want them to have the opportunity where if they want pizza and ice cream, like cool, like, you're an athlete, you do have a good amount of energy that you need, and some of that has to come from energy dense fuel like pizza and ice cream and Oreos and that sort of stuff. And I always do the joke, like, I'm from New York, like, I'll go for a pizza any day. Like, now that I live in the South, every time I'm home, every meal is pizza if I can have it. And so it's just about finding the balance of how we're looking for quality and we're looking for strong fuel choices, but there's plenty of room for other things. And kind of on the same token, we think about quality and leaning into processed foods sometimes, like protein powders are a great example. I have some athletes who will come to my office or meet with me one on one in their teams and they'll say, "Oh, I'm having like protein waffles for breakfast and protein chips at lunch and a protein powder and protein shake and protein this and that." I'm like, hold on. Like, we need real food here. These bonus proteins are awesome and they have a function when you're busy and you just need some really strong, 20 grams of protein right off the bat. but we can't rely on them because then you're missing the iron from beef and the omega-3s from fish, and we're missing all of this good fuel. And so it's just about a conversation of, again, filling their toolbox with where they know they need strong fuel, but they can bring in fun fuel or sports fuel as needed. So it's definitely a it's definitely an educational point I try to make with every athlete and team I work with.
So yes, so I definitely hear that. I know it's always a balance, and a lot of my athletes, they or not even my athletes, but athletes that I talk to, especially the male athletes, because they're like, okay, I just want to get bigger and stronger. It's like, okay, all they think about is, well, I'm eating more protein, and those are those things, and so that's where my brain often goes to. It's like, okay, great, but like, especially that, like you said, the protein. Sometimes they do the protein so much that they're under fueling still, like they're not getting enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, the quality of like, okay, if you're just shoving 3 protein shakes in a day, like, we could do
Yeah.
better.
You're underfueling with nutrients now, and it's such a fine line, but yeah, there's power in protein powder and having that as a convenience food and some good power, but, yeah, you gotta find a balance.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, the next one you mentioned, the night before or the late night practices, workouts, and a lot of athletes and parents are fearful of feeding their athlete late at night.
Mhm.
What's your take on that for the athletes, like the late night post-workout fueling?
Yeah, I always say, like, "Here's your prescription to eat whenever you want to." Like, "Here it is. I wrote it out for you." But I think it's more important that you fuel your body when you need it than listening to, like, the diet rules of you can't eat past 8 or can't eat past 11. Like, your metabolism doesn't shut off at 12 p.m., right? As an athlete, like, you could wake up at 2 a.m. and have something and go back to sleep. Like, you're especially when you sleep, your body needs that fuel to rebuild. So I think if you go in from practice at 11, guess what? If you maybe had dinner 1 at 5, now you're gonna have dinner part 2 at 11:25. You're just gonna find that balance. You may not be hungry enough for that full meal, but that's where we can split it. Pre-practice and post-practice, you can split up that dinner a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. When I also think about too, like the thing I've talked a little bit more about recently is like your so catabolism, they won't necessarily understand, but catabolism basically being you're in this breakdown, your body's breaking down state. And that's kind of where you're at post practice, post game and stuff. It's like we need to get to the building phase where you're actually building back up. So like if you're not fueling afterwards, you're just gonna be breaking down continually.
Yeah, yeah, the building muscle process is like break down, rebuild, but you need the building blocks.
Yeah. Uh let's see. Oh, another one that I was thinking about is you mentioned the sleep, so we can hit on that a little bit too. Is well, actually, let me do an overarching here. So let's talk about growth because I know a lot of our athletes want to be taller.
Yes.
Um, so we'll start with sleep just because I already mentioned that. So like when it comes to how to be taller, what would be some of those big things? And like obviously we can talk about sleep there.
Yeah, yeah. I love this question. So one, I whenever I have an athlete, like I want to know like where they are on their growth curve and like where can we kind of predict they're going on their growth curve? And then I'll ask like how tall is mom? How tall is dad? Where are your siblings at? Like because there is only so much genetics allow you to push, right? So genetics take you so far and then or they give you the opportunity to go so far, but then you have to give your body the energy it needs to get there and then the opportunity to get there. So, meaning energy, fuel, nutrition, you have to be eating consistently. And I think that's the hard part as a teen athlete because you're fueling yourself as a human. So, your immune system, your bone density, all of that stuff. Then you're fueling your growth and development as a teenager and growing into that adult body. And on top of that, you're an athlete. So you're fueling that as well. So you have these three components that just drive your demand for fuel so high. And so I think that's where most teen athletes are under fueling simply because they have three big factors influencing how much they have to eat. So when it comes to growth, eating enough, giving your body the carbs, the proteins, the fats, the calcium it needs to build that structure and add the muscle on. But there is some genetic limiting factor to it. And so we've got that secret sauce, we've got the fuel, we've got the genetics. Now we need the opportunity for your body to do that. And like you said, sleep, insert the kind of chamber where it all happens. Because without sleeping, you're just your body doesn't have the opportunity to repair and build.
Yeah. One kind of as you talked about before with the under fueling, like that impacting your hormones and under sleeping
Mhm.
also impacting those. testosterone, growth hormone, all those things that you guys care about.
Yeah.
I hear recently people talking about TRT, which I haven't heard talked about in a long time, and I'm like, sleep and eat. Like
Yeah.
you don't need
Let's get
TRT.
back to the basics. Back to the basics. Yeah, it's like anything. You can't you can't over supplement or do anything. Like you got to go to the basics before that stuff may even possibly work.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, final question as just kind of a wrap up and reflection in a sense is like if you could go back and tell your younger athlete self like one thing, like what would be that one piece of advice you would give them?
Yeah, this is a great question because I was that underfueled female athlete triad, like textbook Reds athlete. And I would go back and tell myself, like, just eat more. Like, just eat more. I definitely was eating a lot during the day, but I think I fell into the trap of like, you have to have a salad and you have to do this, where as an athlete, you can have a salad, but it shouldn't be your entree, sort of thing. So if I can go back and tell my younger self something and prevent lots of injuries and time on the bench, um, I would definitely say, like, honor your hunger cues and lean into those foods that some people might say, like, they're not good for you. Like, no, you need more carbs, you need more fats, you need more protein to fuel that human self, that teen growth, and your sport.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And that's, I mean, again, that speaks to my population, your population, that talks to all athletes
Yeah,
right there. So,
yeah.
yes.
It's really that simple.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, yeah, Stephanie, thank you so much for hopping on today. What's the best way for athletes to connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at High School Athlete Nutrition or my website, smnutritionrd.com. I have lots of resources and free downloads right there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you again for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks. It was great seeing.
Yeah, of course. And then as always for the listeners, number one, check the show notes. That's where you got Stephanie's resources or links there. And then you guys heard it. You guys hear it from me a lot about the underfueling. You heard it from somebody who specifically like talks about underfueling and works with athletes who chronically do this. So you guys got the message. We need to eat more. We need to, eat more consistently. And so yeah, just remember that. And as always, keep striving for greatness.